follow. I will not, because we said a few minutes. So you can add some points. Because the motivation is not political and it's not money, even though we want to earn our living, but the motivation is much higher, comes from different sources, let's say. Whether we look at topics like flexibility to conventions or harm reduction policy, in Czech view, harm reduction is not a type of service, but it's our approach to drug policy. And the Czech government, now the new Czech government passed the program which says we will regulate drugs according to their risks. And what we're going to focus is minimizing harms and risks. We don't believe that we can achieve society free of addictions. It's maybe even unhealthy. Whether we look at creating new services, creating helping approach, non-judgmental treatment, prevention, any kind of help, it always comes from civil society, or most of the time comes from civil society. So from that point, we keep stressing that civil society has very limited access to decision-making process. You might remember, some of you, 2011, we passed resolution. It was a Czech resolution, the only resolution in this place in CND that is on civil society, and but it's kind of disappeared. So I think we should keep coming back. I think we have few important quests in front of us. I think one quest is to humanize drug policy. I know that I'm preaching to the converted, and I think I don't need to explain what it means, and it's very broad. But I believe if anybody can bring the changes, it's only for the civil society. Even though you don't feel
It's a real pleasure to be here. 40 years is a lot of years, and I feel a bit that I have been invited because I've been part of many of these years, not 40, but 20 probably. Indeed, I was looking a bit, actually the Vienna NGO Committee exists even before UNODC. because the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, where I serve as chief of civil society unit for those who don't know me, it started in '93, formally joining the two fund, which was the drug fund, the Utrip plus the crime fund, and at that time there was already a committee, and I see here Thomas, and I know he was involved at that time very much, and so I kind of started with UNODC, moved a bit to the field with OCHA, came back to be a spokesperson of an executive director who had a kind of love and hate relationship with UNODC, Antonio Maria Costa. I'm sure many of you know him. And at that time, we really would like have meetings to see how we could make sure that there were no problems in the building when civil society would come at the Commission on Narcotic Drugs. And this is why when in 2007 I was given the task I was one person at that time, but still to work with civil society, I said, we need the Vienna NGO Committee, we need to strengthen it, we need a project, we need funding. And here I look at Michel, we had Beyond 2008, a long process to bring us to the 2009 high-level ministerial meeting, but we could first with some seed money of the Canadian Centre of Substance Abuse, and I see Rita here. I don't know if the new CEO is here, but it was seed money. But then we worked together. We succeeded to have European funding, and because somehow, I mean, you need also this, and you need it in one basket, because we wanted to make sure that all NGOs works together. So no matter, we know that on the drug issue, there is such a wide-ranging views. And at the end, we realized that, okay, diversity, yes, but by listening to everybody, it brings to equity. I'm using some words that my professor of philosophy was always using. But the concept is there. We could, through the Beyond 2008 process, bring all the NGOs on the table and ensure that there was a consensus paper. And this consensus paper was presented to member states who had 1 year to look at what the NGOs wanted. So at the 2009 ministerial level, the voice of NGO could be heard and, inserted in many of the documentation, even if something, okay, it was not at 100%, but it did work. Then we had another benchmark, and on my right, Esbjörn was sharing, and he had to lead the way to the UNGAS, the United Nations General Assembly, that took place in 2016 in New York. And again, here, quite a challenge, especially when we arrived in New York, because we were both distributing badges, basically. I mean, we have to tell the truth. And I'm saying this because many thought, oh, wow, we're going to New York. They are much more open than Vienna. I don't know why Vienna had always this reputation of being very much not open to civil society, etc. And then we arrived, and no, there was no way you could go only to one side event, or you could go to the General Assembly, or yes, we spent our time in the street, and I don't remember which avenues, distributing, and Esbjörn sitting on the table making clips, so to have badges. But that's also part of the work. I mean, the UN, as you know, is a member states organization. It has rules, and you need to follow them to be meaningful and to make yourself also heard. So among also the achievement, we put together a platform, the NGO marketplace. If you don't know it, please use it. It's where you can find where NGOs works in which country, communicate, and every morning I receive a newsletter every Monday morning. So it's good to see, oh, okay, people are still active, they post things. So, and here we are today with, I saw over 560 NGO representative registered. Not all are here in person, but still it is quite a challenge. And it's good that we are here to celebrate the 40th anniversary. Of course, the celebration, we have to know that why we are here is because there is a world drug problem, and drugs are dangerous. Drugs continue to kill, and this is why we have the convention and policy, which has to evolve in the year. And here I can see among our speaker, Katherine is here, and for me at least one of the big things that NGO did is at a very early stage to make us realize that there were unexpected consequences of the conventions, that people interpret them in the wrong way, because at the end, it's really a question of interpretation. And it was good that civil society from the Cancer Union were saying, hey, don't let us suffer any longer. We need the medicine. At the same time, we need to control this medicine because again, as I said, they kill. But I don't want to close the feast in a kind of negative thing. I think all of you are bringing a very important experience or knowledge or expertise to the table. And this is why the Vienna NGO Committee has to continue to work and to ensure that the 2024 midterm session is productive, successful, and I'm very pleased that the draft resolution mentioned the civil society, Vienna NGO Committee. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So let's move straight on to our next speaker. As I said at the beginning, very, very pleased to be joined here by the former VNGOC chairs as well. And Michel was the chair when I first met VNGOC and first came to CND. And yeah, love to hear your reflections, and particularly as well, because this is the first time you've been back to CND for some years. So yeah, please, Michel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Jamie. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity of being here. To say that I'm shocked at being back is probably an understatement. The last CND I attended was 2014, so it's been a number of years, and it's been absolutely spectacular to see the success that under your leadership and others, what you've accomplished today. 560 NGOs. I think it's maybe overstated. When I first started working with the NGOC, it was almost considered barbarians at the gate. Like, okay, the NGOs, we don't let them in. It's very difficult. And look at the influence that you have today. It's spectacular. So I was very fortunate to chair the NGOC and the Beyond 2008 process, as Mirella mentioned. And I have a couple of thoughts on that. And I'll also channel former UNODC Executive Director Antonio Maria Costa. I was noted that Executive Director Wally did not show up with 6 bodyguards in jumpsuits. So that's a big change, because that one side event when Mr. Costa showed up with his 6 bodyguards, it was a crazy time. But he would often say that drug matters are too important to be left to government alone. And that is a very true statement. And it's one that we took him at his word. The problem is that NGOs did not have that much influence. And at that time, I'd say civil society was very noisy, but we weren't well heard. And I think the challenge for us then was how can we create a signal among the noise? And this was the time when I think drug policy positions were becoming increasingly hard across the ideological spectrum. you're for harm reduction, you're for legalization, you're for abstinence. Everybody was defining themselves in a very narrow way. And it created some challenges for all of us, including civil society groups that attended the CND. And that hasn't disappeared entirely, but there was an opportunity for us with the 2009 high-level segment, which was to take stock on the progress committed to in 1998 of a drug-free world. We can do it. And you know, so here was the government coming together to see how far they've achieved accomplishments towards this aspirational policy vis-a-vis the reality on the ground. And so again, channeling Mr. Costa, we knew the high-level segment was our opportunity to come together and influence the policy. We come in many voices, and that's one of our strengths, but just like so many voices can make it hard to hear, and it makes it easy to dismiss because we're so it's a cacophony of voices. So we thought a unified voice would make us harder to ignore. And that's really how the Beyond 2008 project was born. And the NGOC owes a debt of thanks to many people in this room and beyond who were there as early contributors, early supporters, financial, otherwise, and I won't list them, but I acknowledge very much the role that you had, because I think Beyond 2008 was a pivotal moment for us in terms of our influence here. We had 13 regional forums, many of which you likely attended. That's another point I'd say is, how many of you here have been for how many CNDs, and you compare that to government delegations, no disrespect intended to government delegations, but typically 3-4 years, maybe 5. NGOs, 20 years, 25 years. So there's a permanency and a corporate history that we bring that is so important here. So at Beyond 2008, we had 13 regional forums across the globe. We engaged with 1,000 organizations from 135 countries, 300 of which came to Vienna to negotiate, just like the UN do, a declaration and some recommendations. And some of you attended that. We all sat in the old C boardroom, and we occupied the seats, and we started to negotiate our own declaration. And to say that we had a very diverse array of civil society actors in that room is probably another understatement. At the end of day one, I left feeling very concerned that it was going to be a spectacular failure because we stumbled across the infamous harm reduction word. Somebody says, we need to have harm reduction included. Others said, there's no way you can include it. Everybody's going off. We leave the day, and we thought, can we actually have a consensus? Some really smart people came around the table the next day. We sat down. We had an informal meeting, just like the governments do. And in a matter of an hour, those who are very pro or against harm reduction came to agreement on language that they all could accept. That kind of paved the spirit, I think, for the process. In the end, we defined lots of defining language and challenging language, and we agreed on a common call to action, specific recommendations we made. So we have the declaration, and then specific recommendations for CND, INCB, UNODC, and civil society members, and then member states as well. And I think it's important to take stock of those recommendations because the vast majority have actually been implemented. And when I left the CND, I said to myself, if we can just do 1 degree of change, doesn't mean that it's not a big change that day, but 1 degree of change over time, if you're heading for a new destination, you're on a new path. And as you see today, I think we're very much in a different place. Still much work to do. Anyways, practically speaking, at that time, we had to hold money, and we weren't a legal entity. So we became a VNGOC, we became a registered entity. We had to go to the bank, which was never easy, and get an account and all that kind of crazy stuff. So again, a massive collaboration with our colleagues. I think we revitalized the relationship with the New York NGO Committee at that time as well, and as it evolved and has become a really strong partner for the civil society hearing that I know that Esbjörn will refer to. So with the midterm review of the political declaration next year, I think it's again an opportunity for the VNGOC to take stock on where you've been, who we have been, where we are, and where we need to go. And I very much agree with the words of my colleague here that civil society will bring the oxygen required to change. I've often said that national interests trump international good. Yeah. And yet we transcend national. We transcend political. We are very much of a voice that brings forward expertise of a different type. Again, so proud of how the VNGOC has continued to flourish. I applaud the work of all the members here, and I recognize that you all go back to your various parts, and those who are online, you are the front line. You actually sit with individuals who are affected by substance use on a daily basis. You provide care, you provide treatment. That's very far from negotiating language and resolutions, but they are inextricably connected, and you bring that expertise here. I think I have to thank Mirella. It's never been easy. The civil society shop unit, the division, I never used the right term, but Mirella has been great to champion the work that we did, find some resources and support for us within a system that was, I wanted to accommodate, but she had to fight for that very much throughout the time. I'd like to thank the member states who are here today, and we have a convert. It's not your fault, Ross. You were an NGO, you've gone to the dark side, you're now a member state. No, if it wasn't for the member states working with NGOs, we wouldn't accomplish anything, because this is an intergovernmental forum. We are guests. We have an opportunity of engaging, an opportunity of influencing, but it is intergovernmental, and we have to respect the rules for that. So without the participation and the collaboration, I think many member states see civil society as strategic assets and allies to advance their own agenda. So that's fantastic, and thank you. I want to thank CCSA, the new CEO of CCSA, Alex Katherine is there. CCSA was amazingly supportive. Rita and I worked together in Rome during the Beyond 2008, and at one point, I'll tell a little story, because we had soft money from Hungary, UK, Canada, but we had real events going on. And my board of directors said, okay, it's okay, Michel. So I had issued written checks for $300,000 in travel and what have you, all on the promise of soft money to come through. It hadn't been realized. And then I thought to myself, well, if that money doesn't come through, CCSA is on the hook for a lot of money. But CCSA was amazingly supportive, and I'm thrilled with the new leadership and his engagement with the NGOC. And of course, I think we all benefit from our predecessors, Eva Tang, Thomas Legal, collaborators, and Esbjörn, and many others who are around the table and have participated in the VNGOC meetings for years, who brought a deep expertise of the UN system for those of us who arrived and not necessarily didn't understand what is the black box here and how does this all work. Anyways, with all that, compliment you again, Jamie, on your leadership. I'm thrilled to see where this will go. All of you have an opportunity in the next days, weeks, months, years, carry forward, because we're all sort of owners of, or occupiers, if you wish, of the mandate of the VNGOC for a particular period, and it's up to us to hand it off to the next person. So congratulations to everything that you're doing. And thank you again for allowing me to be one of the 3 remaining alive. Can I have a short comment? Sorry to jump in that, but I just allowed the chair to have a short comment. You said you are guests. I mean, good governing should include all voices and all key informants. If I'm good governor, I should have all key informants. Do you feel as key informants in foreign policy? Do you have knowledge that no one else does? So you're not guests. You are insiders. You should be. You must be insiders. If you're not, then the track policy is not going to work.
With the guests that they have to invite.
That's right.
Yeah, well, this is wrong governing. Good governing should include all voices, must involve, otherwise you don't have the information.
Yeah, totally. Thanks. Sorry. Okay, well, I'll hand straight over to my predecessor in the role, Esbjörn Hörnberg, who was chair from, please remind me of the dates, 20...
Well, it was after me.
After 14 or 15?
14. Yeah. To 18. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. And of course, I'm happy to be here together with so many people that have developed the Vienna NGOC to this important role. And we know that the space for civil society is shrinking in many parts of the world, but this committee has been able to secure the involvement of organizations working in the field of narcotic drugs, especially here in Vienna. My own experience with this organization goes mainly, or this topic goes mainly back to 2008, even if I was active in the field in Sweden way back in the 1970s. We had a project that was, well, you shouldn't believe it today, but it was more or less legalization in parts of Sweden at that time. 20 years later, I was working with a global project together with WHO and UNODC at that time. And one of my board members in that was Eva Tong, not in Vienna NGOC, but in Geneva we had that. And that was also an experience, I must say. I was working in Africa and in Southeast Asia, and during a mission in Southeast Asia, I accidentally came into this regional consultation for Beyond 2008. I was not really happy with that consultation, I must say. So when the invitation came to Vienna to follow up, I attended that, and this is one of the reasons I became interested to know more about how my organization at that time could be part of the umbrella of Vienna NGOC. Because I must say that I was so impressed of what Michel and the other people in the leadership could do to have a consensus with that group of people. I hadn't met it before, and I wanted to know more. And we were also allowed to be members of Vienna NGOC. And later on, I had the privilege to be on the board together with Michel and other people, of course. Some of them are, maybe you know them better than me. But when we started to work for the high-level meeting in 2004 and the UNGAS process, the workload was so immense, and we had daily conversations, I must say, Michel and me, I was vice chair at that time, and how to even manage to follow up all the meetings and join different missions in this. And suddenly he stepped down. And I was not prepared for that, I must say. And I didn't do the work later on by myself. So please excuse me if I'm going more or less into how I felt about the situation and how I needed to work in a way, because Michel, he had been here to CND, I think, as a representative for the delegation of Canada.
Yep.
So you know the diplomatic way. I have always been working with civil society. I have put pressure up on the government, but I haven't taken any responsibility and spoken diplomatic in that way. I could say what I needed, and then if they listen, that was okay. Otherwise, I just had to leave. But now I had another role. I had to be a little bit diplomatic, and I needed to try to move this organization into the UNGAS process. And there was, of course, a number of challenges at that time. We needed to have a broad representation, because before Michel left, they had agreed on a special structure of the civil society could be involved in the UNGAS process. There should be a civil society task force, and we needed to create that task force. And maybe Katherine will tell about that a little later, but that was a challenge to have it a representation, a global representation, a gender representation, an age representation, a representation of different interests in the drug field, and so on. But we made it. We needed finances, because we needed to meet, we needed to give people from Africa, from Asia, from parts of Europe and Oceania the possibility to attend our meetings and other meetings as well, as representatives of us. And I needed to, in a way, to build a relationship with different entities, with UNODC, with CND chairs, the one coming after another, key member states, and private donors. And luckily, there were people in the board, in our staff, working with Vienna NGO Committee at that time, in UNODC, Mirella and the Secretariat, for example, who could help me. But I also had a lot of help from the membership of Vienna NGO. The civil society task force was established. Member states and one private donor came with money. Some put the money directly to Vienna NGO and some transferred it to UNODC. The latter one was not too easy, I must say. And now Mirella will remember. The UN changed the administrative system during that time, which more or less, for a long time, the money was stuck in accounts where we couldn't get them. And I wanted to go, well, you know how the bureaucracy in the UN is and how easy it is to access whatever part in this building. So I said, we need to tell Fedotov, that the executive director at that time, that this is crazy. No. He's not dealing with this. We have another department, but they are not doing nothing. So in a meeting with Fedotov, I suddenly said that we need help from the executive director to get our money. And he looked surprised. And what's happening? And then suddenly we had the money. That was very good. And then the relationship. I spent a lot of time to try to have trust and confidence with the people who are essential for the involvement of civil society. And Mirella talked about New York. We knew that there was a discussion. Should the discussion of the UNGAS be in New York or should it be in Vienna? That was going back and forth by the member states. And in the end, they decided to have it here. But New York was so important with all the ECOSOC, with all the other ones, except for the human rights and WHO, more or less in Geneva. So I understood that if we are going to have some influence in New York, we need to have also the highest level there on our side. And I learned that the president for the UNGAS would be a Danish guy. And I sent an email to his private account, which I got from the membership. And I asked for a meeting before he could go to New York. He was speaker in the Danish parliament at that time. So we met in his leisure time and we discussed a couple of hours, he in Danish and I in English. And because even if as a Swede, I don't understand all the Danish words. But anyway, he understood what we were going to do and he was very keen on having civil society into this. I also had regular meetings with Executive Director Fedotov and with the different chairs, I must say. And they had, at that time, they appointed Ambassador Sharma from Egypt following the whole process. So that was quite easy. We had a number of people that was, we knew each other at that time. And then it comes to New York again. And the Deputy Secretary General Eliasson, I say Eliasson, people in UN say Eliasson, but he's Swede. And that was also one thing that was a little bit good, because when I met him and I said Jan Eliasson, and he said that, well, I remember when I was young and playing football, we beat the team in your city with 5-0. And he repeated that every time when we met. He was so happy to see, oh, you are here. You remember? 5-0. And that, it sounds very crazy, but it's essential to have the relationship where you can come with all the difficulties. Because as Mirella said about the security, we had 800 organizations coming to New York. We had 300 tickets. You can see 500 was disappointed every morning, every day, every night. And we had to find out the circulation of that. And in the end, we wrote a letter to UN complaining of that, and we had a nice letter, but then UNGAS was over, more or less. We can agree that the UNGAS process was a success for the civil society. But there are two things that I couldn't make in my visions during my time in Vienna NGOC. I wanted to find a real good way to convince the member states that even if they said positive things about civil society up here, that's of course important. It's important to have it in the minutes, to have it in the every paper they are producing. But it's useless if the civil society is not given a voice back home in the national capacity when they are seen as a threat or they are not seen at all. Because even if Czech Republic is used to have civil society as part of a partner, it's not the case all over, I must say. So this, in a way, I failed to find a good way of that. Another thing I wanted to do was to have something in Vienna NGOC where the people who was working directly on the ground could meet and discuss the successes and the failures they had dealing with the drug situation, with prevention, with harm reduction, with recovery, whatever they were doing. And they could find some way to move their own work and perhaps others further on. It might have been so. I might be wrong. I'm happy if I'm wrong, but please tell me. So in the end, thank you all that gave me the possibility to serve you. And I would like to end with a quote I got last Sunday from one of the champions in this process. Mogens Lykketoft, at that time the UNGAS president, 2016, he wrote to me because I asked him, what do you say about civil society? I asked him on lunchtime and dinner time, he came with a mail. And ever increasing civil society pushing for action is also necessary to influence United Nations and its member states to live up to their promises. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So it's been great to hear from you guys about all those processes, which have all paved the way for where we are now. There's still many challenges ahead, but none of this would be possible without your work, Thomas' work, and Aberton as well, and the various VNGOC boards. We want to change it up now, and we want to talk about some practical experiences from some of the NGOs themselves, how they used that space that we've opened up. We've got about 10 minutes left and 2 speakers. So I'm going to hand the floor to Katherine, who's going to talk from the perspective of the International Association on Hospice and Palliative Care, and how they have used this space, this CND, to highlight and bring their issue to the fore. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie and Michel and Esbjörn and Mirella. It's been a walk down memory lane. Because the title of this is Increasing and Meaningful Civil Society Engagement. And when I came here 10 years ago, because I'm pretty sure it was 10 years ago, I didn't know anything about CND or UNODC. I'd been a rabble-rouser and an organizer most of my life in nuclear weapons stuff and Central America and environment, but pretty much always on the outside. I'd never been on the inside with member states and multilateral organizations, so I really didn't have a clue how to do it. And Michel was president of VNGOC then, and Mike Trace was the president of IDPC, which who really guided me in how to do this then. Because what absolutely bewildered and puzzled me was the fact that the issue of access to internationally controlled essential medicines for palliative care and pain relief and opioid use disorder was nowhere really in the agenda. There were a few throwaway paragraphs sometimes in a ministerial declaration or it was just not discussed on the floor, and it wasn't discussed at the drug policy civil society congresses I would go to. Once I went back to school after I'd done my doctorate, because I actually couldn't get a job teaching because my dissertation was on felony disenfranchisement in the United States, which was another thing that nobody'd ever heard of when I started it. And universities weren't really hiring then. So I went back to school and I learned to be a hospice volunteer, and because of the death of my mother, which was really horrible without good pain control. And gradually I learned about the fact that 80% of the world has no access to medicines for pain relief, which I was just stunned by that fact, because I thought I knew more or less what was going on in foreign policy in the world and things, and I just didn't know that. It was interesting to hear the Belgian ambassador, who was chair of CND last year, say the same thing to me yesterday. He said he didn't know about it till basically last year or the year before. So if an ambassador of a major European country didn't know that, it's quite extraordinary how many people don't. So Mike, as president of, or chair, I don't remember, of IDPC, finally, because I wouldn't let up in bugging him about this, gave me 5 minutes at a member state briefing 10 years ago to talk about the issue. And then we got Switzerland interested. Martin Matter, who's a wonderful diplomat from Switzerland, who's now in China, took it up as something that Switzerland was interested in. Mark Rutgers from the Netherlands, and some other member states. We had to scrounge to get side events. I met the delegation for a woman from Lithuania in the ladies' room and begged her to sponsor a side event. The first time we ever had a side event on this topic. Now there are 4. There would have been 4 if we hadn't canceled ours, because we thought 4 was maybe too many for a week. Very high level side events on access to medicines. And it was the topic, as most of you know, of last year's CND, the project. Apparently each chair gets to choose a topic that they make their pet topic. And the Belgian ambassador made access to medicines his topic and did this wonderful No Patient Left Behind campaign, which really gave a boost to our global advocacy. The issue is, as Esbjörn touched on in his intervention just now, was that member states make these wonderful commitments. I would have said on paper a few years ago, but now in PDFs. And the implementation on the ground is really quite different. So my organization is a global membership organization. We have members in about 108 countries, and mostly practitioners. I am the only advocacy person. Actually, it's quite astonishing. It's not to blow my own horn, it's just kind of astonishing, in the world who gets paid to talk about this issue, even though it affects 80% of people in the world who have no access. And our funding for advocacy is actually drying up. So I may not have a job next year because it's just not seen as a priority still, even though member states have made it a priority at a place like this. And at WHO, we've got wonderful resolutions and documents from the World Health Assembly, but translating that into action is a completely different thing. But I wouldn't have been able to raise the profile of this issue with our other civil society partners were it not for VNGOC partnerships with IDPC, with Esbjörn and the Civil Society Task Force, which was just a miracle of somehow being able to collaborate with people. Esbjörn and I had a constant ongoing sort of bickering about the fact that he would always say that there were 2 sides in drug policy, and how do we reconcile the 2 sides? He was really stressed about it. And I would always say, there aren't 2 sides, we're all the same side. which is public health and the well-being, as the single convention says in the preamble, of the health and welfare of humankind. And that's our job, to get member states to pay attention to that. And that, yes, we may all come from different perspectives, but I think it's just a miracle how VNGOC has been able to get people around the table. So it's certainly a lesson to the country where I'm a citizen of, which is the United States, where people can barely speak to each other anymore, even in the same family, if we're from different points of view, because it's so polarized. And VNGOC was never like that. It's not like everyone was Pollyannish about different perspectives, but we were all committed to having a say and being at the table. And I must say the situation in Geneva is completely different. And Geneva is really, really difficult now. It used to be much better. We get 1 minute to give our statements on the floor in Geneva at the World Health Assembly or the Executive Board. 1 minute. Our statements can be 150 words, even our written submissions. That's how pathetic the civil society participation is compared to here, thanks to the people at this table. So that's all I've got time for. And thanks.
Thank you, so you have 1 minute. Let's do it Geneva style. Before we wrap up, yeah, let's give the floor to Matej. She's also going to give another example of what Jindřich was talking about at the beginning about civil society, the NGOs here being the catalyst for the change, the oxygen for the change, and from the prevention perspective, some real fantastic outcomes that you achieved in recent years. So, Matej.
Yeah, thank you very much for selecting me as a speaker here, even for 1 minute. I would say that I'm a kind of a rare commodity here because I'm here actually in 3 different roles. Officially, I am a member of national delegation as a NGO civil society representative. So I made it in a way to become an important part of our national delegations. Sometimes I make jokes of myself that because I used to work for the government many years ago, and I make jokes that maybe they forgot to remove me from the list of national delegates because I was involved in CND already 20 years ago when I worked at the government office for drugs. I remember those times in C building, not M building did not exist at all. But that's a joke. So I was able to come back to the list after. After a few years. And the second role, my primary role is here as a civil society representative. And in that role, I'm here speaking about some good examples which might help other civil society organizations to move things forward and search for windows of opportunities which are not so rare here. They happen often, and we have to be aware of them and jump into those windows when it's time to do it. And the third role, I'm here also in this building. It's as a deputy chairperson of Vienna NGO Committee, his deputy. So you will see me around this building in all those 3 roles. And the story which I wanted to tell you started many years ago because after I was reintroduced to CND many years ago, I followed the discussions, and I was quite surprised because my focus at our institute, Utrip, is more prevention. So I was more focusing on what is going on in the field of prevention. What are the discussions? What are the topics? And I was a little bit shocked because most of the discussions were when the problem was already a burning issue. So in adolescence and early adulthood and adulthood. So nobody was speaking, and the language here was not even close to early developmental stages, like social and emotional learning, some parental skills and education, etc. That was a kind of non-existing issue here. And then I approached our national delegation, people from the Ministry of Health, which used to be my colleagues when I used to work at the ministry. So I approached them and asked them if there is any possibility that they, as a government, could draft a resolution and try to push it through the process on early prevention topic. And they said, okay, this is a difficult process. We have no capacity to do it. So the mission should do the whole work, etc., etc. A lot of excuses. But then it came to the situation last year when Slovenia was the EU presidency country. So our government actually led the EU, and they wanted to do something also at CND as a EU presidency country. And they actually decided that they should try with the resolution. And the idea then was, okay, let's try with early prevention resolution, which was completely something from the space here, according to terminology and language, etc. And there was some difficulties of understanding this issue at Committee of the Whole in informal discussions about the resolutions, but we made it at the end. So last year, the resolution on early prevention was adopted by consensus. More than 40 plus countries supported. I think that no country abstained or voted against, so it was adopted by consensus. And this is a new, starting point. We brought new terminology, new approaches, and we urge member states to invest more in early stages of in parents, in kids, in kindergartens, even in infancy period, because the investment will bring much more savings as if we start doing things in adolescence, when drug-related issues and or other risk behaviors are already a kind of burning issue. And then we are urged to do something, but the investment is much better as early as possible, because the outcomes will be much better. So this is the story how NGO, a small NGO like our institute, can make an impact on the global level. It's possible. You just have to wait for windows of opportunity and jump at that moment, not waiting, jump at that moment and do things as good as possible, and be consistent in this process.
Thank you very much, Matej. Thank you. So thank you to all the panelists. It's been lovely to have you all here. We really appreciate it. And thank you as well again to Czech in Australia for co-hosting this with us and UNODC. We have to leave the room because there's another side event starting at 2 o'clock, also co-sponsored by some society as well.